of the wondrous works of the Lord. Sing of the wondrous works of the Lord.
Luke chapter 22. And I probably won't let you stay there very long. We'll come back and look at it, but I'm going to have you hold a finger there or something, and we'll go back a little bit earlier in Luke. But here's where we start. Here's where we left off last week. Here's where we've been for a while. The Garden of Gethsemane. Seeing Jesus alone there and doing something in that place so that we don't ever have to be alone. There's so much going on as you look at what's taking place. And like the first man in the first garden, Jesus here, the second man, the last Adam, is doing more than you'll imagine at first glance. So we take some time. Here's the place where Adam, the Son of God, was defeated. And now Jesus, the Son of Man, prevails. And what I just said, if I know this is the beginning of the study and you're still flipping your Bibles open and still wondering what you're going to have for lunch. And maybe you've heard nothing of what I said just now because you know that I'm just kind of warming up as well. But actually, I said exactly what I meant to say. When I said that Adam, the Son of God, failed and Jesus, the Son of Man, prevailed, I meant that. And here's why I said that. Let's look back. Hold a finger there in Luke 22. Let's go back to the beginning of the story a little bit, at least the beginning of Jesus' ministry, back to Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3, you'll remember the story. Verse 21, it says that it came about when all the people were baptized that Jesus also was baptized, and while he was praying, heaven was opened, and the Holy Spirit descended upon him bodily in the form of a dove. And then a voice came out of the heavens saying, "This is my beloved Son. You are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased." And when Jesus began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being supposedly the son of Joseph, the son of Eli, the son of Matthat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi. And I won't read them all, but it goes on and on, the son of, the son of, the son of, all the way down through David, down through Abraham, all the way down to the last line of chapter 3. Verse 38, the son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Adam was, in a sense, by direct creation, he was the Son of God. Now, the Father, speaking from the heavens, said to Jesus, "You are the Son of God." He said, "You're my beloved Son, and you, I'm well pleased." But Adam, the first man, we know he failed. We're his offspring. But Jesus, rightly, is referred to in the New Testament as the second man and the last Adam. And really, the battle is not, we get all caught up, and maybe you're already confused, and I didn't start this to get you confused. I just want you to notice something here. That whereas the Father says, "You're my Son, and I'm so pleased, I'm so proud of you," and Jesus begins his ministry that way, we're told his heritage goes back to a man who failed. A man named Adam, which is simply a man. He was the man. He was the first man, and he failed. He was the Son of God, and he failed in the first garden. And then, of course, chapter 4 says, Jesus, now full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan. He was led about by the Spirit in the wilderness, and for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days, and when they had ended, he became hungry, like I'm going to die. The body can't endure. The human body can only take so much. And for 40 days, his soul was tormented, being tempted by the devil, but his body was just about to give out. And it was the devil who said to him there, "If you're the Son of God." And you get that over and over. This Son of God phrase is something often in the mouth of demons. Here it's in the mouth of the devil himself. It's true. The Father said, "You're my Son." But the battle lines are being drawn by the enemy in a way that Jesus, that really wasn't his emphasis. Are you the Son of God? Are you the Son of God? And the temptations, of course, they go on. And we then finally come to that place, verse 13 of the same chapter, when it says, when the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time. So There was that place where we're told an angel came and ministered to the physical body of Jesus. An angel came and ministered and helped him there. And the devil goes off until an opportune time. And now we go to the Garden of Gethsemane, back to chapter 22. And here's the opportune time. Just like in the first garden, when the first man was there and out comes the snake, out comes the serpent. Here's the serpent again. Here's Jesus, the Son of Man. And when I say the Son of Man, I'm just quoting Jesus. He wasn't worried about, am I the Son of God? He knew he was the Son of God. Of course he's the Son of God. And Adam, the first man, failed. What Jesus wants us to know, and that's why I hope I'm not making a big deal about it, but it's an important fact that you understand that he's not ashamed to call us brethren. And over 70 times in Luke's gospel, he always refers to himself, I'm the Son of Man. I belong to humanity, even failed humanity. I've come to identify, and more than just identify, I've come to repair and to heal and to fix. And so now he's back into a garden, and he's being crushed, and he's going through all these things for, I don't know how many, 3 weeks or so we've been looking at the things going on. But here comes again the serpent into the garden. It says there at the beginning of chapter 22, the feast of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was approaching. And the chief priests and scribes were seeking how they might put him to death, for they were afraid of the people. And Satan, he entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, who belonged to the number of the 12. And he went away and he discussed with the chief priests and the officers how he might betray Jesus unto them. And so that's the story that we've been seeing, the one we've been looking at. And so up in verse 43, again the angel coming. Jesus is now physically, again, not 40 days of fasting, but times of prayer, in which he said to his disciples, would you stay awake and give me human companionship here for a while? Would you stay with me, because my soul is deeply distressed to the point of death? He was looking for human help, human comfort. He didn't get it. He said the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. Even the ones that he'd given the most to, Peter, James, and John, they kept falling asleep. But Jesus kept fighting the fight, the good fight, for us. And then here again, an angel now comes to minister, to strengthen him. It says there in verse 43, an angel from heaven appeared to him to strengthen his body, to keep on going. He's not going to die there. He's going to die on the cross. And there he was, now strengthened, and being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down to the ground. And then he arose from that prayer. And he came to his disciples, and he found them sleeping from their sorrow. And so when Jesus arose from prayer, it's not just physically he got up, he'd been praying. Typically, a Jewish man, a Jewish person would pray standing up. But he was, again, physically so distraught, the great drops of blood. He fell on his face, he fell to the ground. But through that prayer, he was strengthened. And he arose from prayer. His disciples were depressed. They were sleeping from sorrow. Their sorrow was just taking them to a lower and lower state of consciousness. And finally they slept. This is not the kind of sleep that we need. You know, we went back. We saw Elijah depressed in the wilderness. We saw an angel sent to him. We saw that sometimes we need sleep. Sometimes it's refreshing. But what these guys were doing that night wasn't refreshing. It was exhausting. It was a form of depression that we don't need to let ourselves get into. This is something more than a medical problem. This is a problem of the soul that Jesus, as much as he wanted someone to stay with him and pray, and as much as they failed, he was still thinking about them. Pray that you won't enter into temptation. There's something that's going to happen tonight that it doesn't have to be that bad. You know, prayer doesn't mean that Judas won't come and the enemies won't come with their swords, and it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't going to go to the cross. All that's got to happen. But it doesn't have to harm you. It doesn't have to hurt you. It doesn't have to tear you up inside as much as it did for them. And he's encouraging them to pray. So Jesus gets up from prayer, and he's ready for everything that follows. He's ready to do what needs to be done. He's ready to heal. He's ready to move forward. His disciples, of course, obviously, they're not. And he said to them, verse 46, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. He says, I'm ready. You guys are not. And 3 times he did this. 3 times he went through this with them. And so, okay, everyone's awake now. Being awake and being aware aren't the same thing. Jesus is awake and aware, and he's ready. His disciples are, okay, something's going on here. And it says, verse 47, while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was out there in front, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. And we talked mostly about that last week. We just sang earlier, what a friend we have in Jesus. Do your friends despise, forsake you? How much that can hurt when somebody you really counted on, someone you really trusted, someone you thought that maybe they were on your side, and then they do something where they would even take something that's a kindness, a kiss, and turn that into a weapon, and how hurtful that can be, and how that wounding can go on for the rest of your life. And here, that happens to Jesus, but Jesus shows us the way to deal with it. And when that happens to Jesus, he turns it around. We talked last week about that proverb that says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. The kisses of an enemy can be mighty painful, but they're deceitful. In other words, if it's a lie, if it's a deceit, if it's phony, if it's fake, it's not worth weighing, it's not worth worrying about, it's not worth focusing on, it's not worth thinking about. It hurts, but you know what? You're just going to have to get that behind you. Here's where to focus. Focus on the wounds of a friend, because Jesus is that friend. And his wounds are our healing. And so here, this happens to him because he knows it's going to happen to us once in a while. Here, this takes place, and Jesus is the faithful one. And again, that's always our focus. But again today, Jesus. I want to talk a little bit today about wounds that won't heal. Because I think that in many ways has been the history of our planet from the first garden. Wounds that won't heal. Here in Jesus, here in this Garden of Gethsemane, I see something. I want to help you to see something that tells us where to put our focus and where we can find our healing. Don't think about how could he do that? How could she do that? How could they? Don't set your mind on deceit. Deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. But instead, I encourage you, place your wounded heart, place your wounded hopes, place your wounded faith in his faithful wounds. Because in that first garden, long ago, however it happened, the picture itself is clear. Some kind of sickness, a sickness unto death, began way back in that first garden, and it's infected us all to some extent. But there's a healing that happens right here in this garden. There's a healing that begins, and it'll heal you. Did you hear that? If you'll allow it, if you're willing. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes on him wouldn't perish, but have everlasting life. Whoever. But you see, love always leaves the choice. And he loves you. You have no choice about that. He loves you. Will you allow his love to heal you? When we're going to talk about wounds that won't heal, if we're looking at just the outward body, if we're talking in terms of physical health, wounds that won't heal in the whole medical world, in the whole system, wounds that won't heal are a big deal, huge financial deal. If you work in the healthcare industry, if you're involved in skilled nursing facilities or hospitals, you'll know that wounds that won't heal get everybody's attention because the government will slap you so hard. Many big corporations have gone out of business. And so there's a lot of attention paid to chronic wounds, bed sores and stasis ulcers and flesh-eating bacteria and all that yucky stuff that can cause amputation and death and can cause financial ruin. But that's not that big of a deal. That's just money. And even the body isn't forever. Even if it's healthy, it doesn't stay healthy forever. But all of it's a good picture. That whole concern about wounds that won't heal, a good picture to consider about the sores in our soul, about the wounds that are way down within our inner person, because that's forever. And you have a choice. That's the wonderful thing. God has already made his choice clear. He wants to heal. He wants to help. And I'll tell you, most of the healing, at least for me, I think I'm willing, but a lot of times maybe not as willing as I think I am. And maybe the healing process is the work of a long lifetime. Learning to heal, learning to be healing, letting him do what he does. But it's certainly worth giving our attention to, because Jesus is ready. When he rose from that prayer, his body nearly done in. And the angel strengthened him, but in some ways, his death, the death that took place on the cross, began here in the garden. And in some ways, the suicide later that happened with Judas, it was starting already here. There's things in this garden that are going on that they don't have to go that way. Jesus took the course that can heal us, but when he rose from prayer, when it says there that he got up and told his disciples, now you should pray as well. He was ready to heal, and ready for Judas. When Judas arose, Jesus wasn't shocked. Again, we looked at that last week. He saw Judas, he knew what Judas had come for, and he spoke to Judas. And I was thinking about it last week, and I've thought about it again all week, and the more I think about it, the crazier it is. I don't know what was going on inside of Judas. I don't know what's going on in my own mind or heart at times. But the further you get from God and the more you listen to the enemy, the crazier your thoughts can be. And you don't know which end is up. And the Lord Jesus is always the one to give us the upward calling. Say, look to me, there's hope. That's up. We all know that Judas committed suicide later, but it was only after he realized, what have I done? And whatever the money meant to him, he threw it back into the treasury, and then he did something that, it's crazy. Nowadays we have ways of coming back even from something like that, in a sense. I've been talking about good news. I'm done now. I'm not going to talk about any more good news. But for 12 weeks before Thanksgiving, I kept telling you something that you don't hear that's just good news. And then one of my friends brought to me some good news last week, and because I'm so geared toward bad news, I didn't know what in the world he was talking about. Because I got good news for you. Narcan. He said, well, maybe Narcan, but I can't. What are you talking about? And he's just referring to the fact that there's a drug that's been around a while, but because of the big opioid problem in this country, they've actually made it available where for $20, $30 at Walgreens or Rite Aid, you can get this little nasal thing that somebody may well be on the verge of death because of opioids. And you just spray that in their nose, and miracle, they come back from the dead. And whatever drove them, if it was an overdose, intentional overdose, whatever may have driven them to that place, a lot of times it's like you think clearer, you think later, you think, man, I wish I could do it over again. What was I thinking? And God goes on forever. Life goes on forever. Suicide is a horrible thing for the folks that are left behind. It's terrible what happened to Judas. But where does that stuff begin? I guess I leave in the hands of the merciful God all that stuff that's just sad. But if we can stop it before it gets there. And so often, sometimes when it's reversed, people say, man, how can I not get there again? Life is worth living. I didn't see it at the time. Whatever got me to that point. What got Judas to that point? He planned to kiss him, but we saw last week that when he actually got there, he began to smother Jesus with kisses. And I don't think that was a big act. It's the same word used of the Father when he embraced the prodigal son, that there's this turmoil. And don't forget, it says over and over, we read it again in Luke's gospel, that it says that Satan entered into him. I mean, he's demon-possessed to the highest degree. He's Satan-possessed. And so Jesus was ready for this. Jesus wasn't surprised. Jesus was, as always, ready to heal. And here comes Judas, and who knows what's going on in what has been going on for the longest time. I pointed out something last week that, again, I got to thinking about later. Jesus had pointed out Judas just hours before at the supper table when one of the disciples was curious, who's the betrayer, who's the one? And Jesus did an act of true kindness. a kiss, so to speak, that was appropriate at a dinner table. He took a bit of the bread, put it in the sop, gave it to Judas. That was what you did for a close friend. That was a very public, loving act of kindness. And when Jesus did that, he was pointing out, that's the one. Now, you and I know Jesus. I hope you and I know Jesus well enough to know that that wasn't a Judas kiss. That wasn't, I'm going to signal the one by just acting like I love him. Jesus loved him. Jesus gave him a real kiss. Jesus gave him a real act of kindness. I care for you. But even that, when your soul is already getting twisted, when you've already had these self-inflicted wounds, it's even something intended in kindness can be seen as a weapon, can be seen as something turned against. We're told that immediately thereafter, Judas got up, but we're told that Satan entered into. And then when Jesus said, what you do quickly, it seems the language is that he's talking to Satan there. What you do quickly. But what's the turning point? Could it be in the mind of Judas, he's seeing that Jesus is pointing me out as the one by this phony gift of kindness? In his head, could the Judas kiss begin with Jesus? He did that to me. Could Judas have actually seen his 11 brothers there as my enemies? I've been pointed out. I've been given over to my enemies. He ratted me out with a piece of bread. Isn't that crazy? Crazier things get going in your mind. And even when someone loves you, and even when someone is trying to help you, you see it as this is an attack. And then when Satan gets in there, it's horrible. And so now here Judas comes along, and he does what he does. But here's what I see in those words in red. Jesus says, verse 48, Judas. He's not talking to Lucifer. He's not talking to Satan. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. It's powers and principalities. And Jesus doesn't deal with Lucifer here. He doesn't deal with Satan. Satan's there. The snake is there, but let's not talk to him. The venom is in the lips of the viper. But Jesus is talking to Judas. Just like when the man who was possessed by a legion, who are you? Who are you? And then the legion starts to speak. But Jesus is always trying to say, I see there's someone inside you. I see there's a man. There's somebody I love. There's somebody I care for. Like we saw last week, he said, friend, what you're doing. That wasn't words to the devil. That was for Judas. You're a friend. And again, that groan, too deep for words, too hard to translate. What you're doing here. And so when Jesus speaks these words, it was to heal and to release Judas. Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man? Are you the one who's doing this? What's really at work within you? Are you betraying the Son of Man? Are you turning me over? We know that Jesus was more than willing to turn himself over. He was in control. Who was Judas betraying? He didn't know it, but he was betraying himself. He was putting himself into the hands of the enemy. He was hurting himself far more than he could ever hurt Jesus, far more than he could ever hurt all the disciples. What a horrible thing to do to yourself. The suicide, even here, it's beginning. What a horrible thing. If you can stop it somewhere in the early part where you're wounding yourself and beating yourself up and twisting even acts of kindness from God himself as though it's an attack on you. Crazy stuff happening here. But Jesus, again, that's my point. Jesus is always ready to heal. And Jesus is talking to Judas. He says, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Is this really you and what's really happening here? And so, Jesus, ready to heal, right then, right now, always ready to heal, and then back to us for our learning. The disciples, not ready at all. They've been sleeping, but they don't wake up refreshed. They don't wake up ready for anything other than just to act foolishly. Like on the Mount of Transfiguration when they were sleeping, and then Peter said something stupid. And the gospel writer was kind to say he didn't know what he was saying. He'd been asleep. And here now again, they wake up in a stupor. All of a sudden this crowd's coming. Here comes Judas. Here comes all of this action. They wake up, but they're not at all ready. And it says, when those who were around Jesus saw what was going to happen, or what they thought they saw was going to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" Now, at least they asked, right? "Lord, shall we do it?" But you folks know what happens next. They don't wait for an answer. Jesus didn't say, "Yeah, get those 2 swords that you guys were talking about earlier." They don't wait for an answer. One of them just starts to swing. "Shall we do it?" Of course his answer was no. But don't wait for an answer. Remember back in Luke chapter 9, James and John, they see a town of Samaritans that doesn't want Jesus to come. "Lord, should we call down fire from heaven and just torch them?" Jesus said, "You don't know what kind of spirit you belong to." He said, "The Son of Man hasn't come to destroy men's lives. He's come to save men's lives." And they still don't know. And here they don't have the power to call down fire from heaven. They would have had to have gotten an answer to do that. But they've got swords. They don't wait for an answer. Thank God they didn't have thermonuclear weapons. Thank God they didn't have heavier duty stuff, because you know what? Human nature's no better. And it's frightening to think that what we're capable of to defend our way of life, to defend the Christian way of life, what we would do, what we have done. It's human nature, something that began long ago in the first garden. But rather than focus on that, rather than focus on the frightening stuff, look at Jesus. He's ready. He's ready to deal with this. His disciples aren't. They wake up in a stupor. They want to do something. The one who's least ready of all is the one who swings the sword. We know that later. It's Peter. Peter's the one who swings the sword. And I say he's the least ready of all because he's the one who had something to prove that night. Because he'd already said earlier, "Lord, I'm ready. The rest of these guys may fall away. I am ready." And he kept falling asleep. He was sad, and he was brave, and he had a lot of the human traits that the better parts of who we are. But it wasn't enough. The spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. And because he didn't pray as Jesus was doing, he wasn't ready to deal with the fact that all of this is happening, and I got to get through it. And the way to get through it isn't swinging the sword. But you see, Peter had something to prove that night. We'll go further into this next week. You know how it plays out. But I'll tell you, of all the wounds that won't heal, wounded pride, wounded ego is one of the worst. When you got something to prove, you've got something, you feel like you've been publicly put down. Jesus said, "Simon, Simon." And again, that public thing, maybe like Judas, publicly in front of all the guys. Here I was saying that of all the guys, I'm the one that's ready. But Jesus said, "No, you're not." And it wasn't to put him down, and he never wants to put us down. He always wants to help us out. But again, this is a group of guys that were arguing at that very table. Which of us is the greatest? All of our competitive instincts, all of our mutual ego games. And then the wounded pride, the wounded ego. Talk about the wounds that won't heal and the wounds that keep wounding. So that's that. Shall we do it? Don't wait for an answer. It says, verse 50, Luke is kind, doesn't tell us it's Peter. John's not so kind, he tells us. A certain one of them, he struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Now, that wasn't his goal. Maybe he was a fisherman, maybe he wasn't a good swordsman, but it wasn't his aim. It wasn't like, go for the ears. If we can get their ears off, then we can win this battle. And as to why he missed, I don't know. But he missed. He missed the mark. That's what sin means, to miss the mark. Even in his sin, he's sinning. Even when he wants to do something he shouldn't do, he doesn't even do that right. That's us. It's our human frailty. Sometimes one cancels out the other, but that wasn't his goal. He would have split that guy's head wide open if he could have aimed a little bit better. But here's the focus always. Jesus. But Jesus answered. Now, no one said anything. There was no question. How do you answer? You answer the situation, and here's how Jesus answered the situation. He said, enough. Stop. No more of this. And then he touched his ear and he healed him. Now, depending on what translation of the Bible you have, it may be very different from what I just read. Stop. No more of this. And if you have something different than what I just read, it's because I have the Holy Bible and you have something less than that. It's because it's a very, very hard thing to translate. Just like that phrase earlier when Jesus said, friend, what you're doing. Sometimes there are groanings too deep for words. Sometimes something is happening and there's emotion and there's passion. And friend, what you're doing. And here, what he says, it's hard to translate. But it's something along the lines of, allow this, permit this, enough of this, but let me, at least this. It's that idea of permit, allow, and then before the sentence can be completed, he does the one thing that completes it. He heals the ear of that person. But in that moment, he says, allow this, permit this, let me do this, and then he does it. And apparently the slave of the high priest let him do it. And apparently Peter and the others held back enough to let him do it. And that's maybe one of the better things they did that night. Just quit fighting and let him do something. And they did let him do that. Too bad they didn't do more. Too bad they didn't learn to do what he was doing. And I'm pointing all of this out because I see it and I want to show you. This is where the healing comes from. The healing comes from healing. And what Jesus does for that man, he would have done for all. And if the disciples had really been praying, not praying to make all this go away, but praying to be ready that when it happens, I don't want to make it worse. When all these wounding things take place tonight, I want to do what he said earlier. Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. If they had really been praying, if they had really been ready, it didn't have to be this way. Not for them. It could have been more like Jesus. Jesus recognized who the true enemy is. Judas isn't the enemy. Friend, what you're doing. Judas is a man to have compassion on. Judas is a person, if I could somehow still get through to him. Jesus is already expressing what he said later and what he carried through all the way to the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And it's still the same, and he's still the same. Now the disciples, those surrounding, I don't think they saw what Judas was doing. I mean, they may have woke up and saw, oh, there's Judas. There's Judas. Where was he tonight? We read earlier, John's gospel says that when Jesus gave him that little bit of bread and showed love and kindness toward him, and when Judas got up and left, we're told Satan entered him. But the disciples didn't see anything different. They didn't know why he left. He was the guy they all trusted so much that he's the accountant. He's the one who carries the books. He's the one who we give the money over to. And they assumed that he went out to go buy something to help someone, because that's what his job is. And I think when they awoke from their sorrow and they saw Judas kissing Jesus, that might not have seemed so strange to them. But of course, when you see this crowd with clubs and spears and all of this happening, then of course, that's the thing. You pull out, do you want us to fight? Do you want us to fight? I say that because I believe that if they had seen Judas and knew at that point, he is the rat. He's the one who's causing all this to take place. I believe if they'd seen that and thought that, Judas wouldn't have had to commit suicide. Peter would have killed him right then and there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think so. It was later that they began to piece it all together. They began to, what happened that night? What took, Judas, how could you do that? And all the stuff that went on. But Jesus was awake, and Jesus was aware, and Jesus wasn't about to kill Judas. Jesus wasn't being defensive toward Judas. Jesus let him kiss him. Let him kiss him profusely. He told us to turn the other cheek toward an enemy when he hits us. How much more was Jesus going to turn the other cheek? Not like, how could you do this? But you know what? The goodness of God leads to repentance. And if somehow Judas could have repented there, not later when he throws the money in the treasury, but if he could have repented there, Jesus would have healed him there. Jesus would have forgiven him there. Let me do just this. And yet, at that moment, sadly, Judas wouldn't let him. And sadly, a lot of us, we just won't let him. Stop this crazy thinking. Stop this stuff that we're doing. Stop this way in which we take our wounds and we wound others and we get defensive, and on and on it goes from the Garden of Eden. And so here's Jesus doing something that, oh God, help us to wake up and start doing. Jesus was wounded by us. We did it. He was wounded for us. He did it for us. But he was never wounded at us. He was never like, how could they? Not toward Judas, not toward anybody. Jesus never turned his wounds into weapons. Now, sadly, the Jews have been treated horridly through the ages. Christ killers. How dare you? Not Jesus, far from it. His wounds, far from being turned into weapons, his wounds were always the source of healing. I've been hurt. Let me help you. You hurt me. Let me help you. And that's the way that wounds heal, is by healing. And that's the way that Jesus worked, because that's who the Son of Man is. It's the kind of people that we can be. Yeah, kisses can be weaponized. It's terrible. It's terrible what people can do to other people. But that's deceptive. That's phony. It's not worth focusing on. But the actions of Jesus here, man, it's healing. He did it for you. He did it for the worst of us. You know, maybe bad things have happened to you. But whoever's done you wrong, they've wronged themselves more than you. Because they did it. God help you to let it go. They need to go to God and get help themselves. But those who've done you the worst have done the worst to themselves. And Jesus knows that. And when you've been through prayer and you wake up, you realize that's always the case. You know, we're all in some sense humanity. We're the walking wounded, the last ones to be triaged out of this place. We're hurt, maybe stunned, don't even know what hit us. But what often happens is we become the wounded. We become those who hurt others because we've been hurt. And we go on doing things and we don't even know what we're doing or why we're doing it. Again, Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. But we've been doing it for a long, long time now. And in a place like this, in a section like this of the Scripture, is a place for each of us not to command the nation, but my own soul to say, how long am I going to let this keep on happening? Every one of us has to decide for ourselves, because we all get hurt, but we each have to decide, how much is this hurt going to harm me? And the harm happens when I start letting it linger. How much is this going to be a source of brooding? How could they do this? How could this happen? I can't believe. How long will it last? You know, back to the analogy just for a minute of the human body, the picture of wounds that won't heal, it's a useful picture. If you want a physical wound to heal, you got to do a couple of basics, like first of all, stop the blood loss, stop the bloodletting, stop the flow of blood. That's a good beginning. But what about the sword? Put it away. No healing there. And secondly, when it comes to the physical body, you need to restore the supply of blood once again, because if the blood's not getting there, it can't heal. And I think that's where the Son of Man, I think that's where Jesus came in. He didn't just give us a transfusion. He joined us permanently. He's a part of our humanity. And though Adam was fresh off the factory line, he was the Son of God, he was created, he was perfect, he still failed. Along comes Jesus. Yes, he's the Son of God in the highest sense, but the one title that he wants you to know is that I'm your brother. You belong to me. I'm the Son of Man. And he came to give us The blood. He shed his blood so that we could have the blood that enables us to heal and to help others to heal. And again, back to the human body, if you want a wound to heal, it has to have the blood supply, and it has to be connected to the whole body, because a wounded heel or a wounded fingertip or a wounded toe belongs to the body. And you need a connection, a healthy connection to the whole body. And that's where so often we think, I know how to heal this, I'll amputate. And I know how to amputate, I'll cut you off. You're gone. I'm whole. No. Not until we're all. And I'm not saying, a lot of things, the best I can do is let it go and just quit thinking and quit worrying about it. But just understand, God's got a much higher goal. He wants to bring about the reconciliation of the world. So be open to that. Even if you can't think about it right now, too painful to even think about that person, just let it go. But understand this, God desires a connection to the whole body. And again, with physical wounds, sometimes a little air is healthy. Sometimes it's just been covered too much. A little light can be a part of the healing process. All that analogy, all that picture stuff, that's prayer. That's what Jesus did in prayer. That's what you and I can do in prayer. We can take it to God. God, help me to stop the bloodletting and help me receive the blood fresh from you, and help me to believe that I belong to the whole body and no one's going to get cut off here. Not ultimately. That's not the goal. Bring in the air, bring in the light. That's prayer, that's healing. I'll tell you, you can rise from prayer. And the problems keep coming at you, but you're ready for them. Not ready with a sword, not ready to prove something, but you're ready to heal. Jesus was ready to heal. The wounds that won't heal in our soul, I think they're often the self-inflicted ones, the self-infected ones, the ones we keep picking at, the ones that we just bury and never bring them to the light, the ones we allow to fester, and all of that sort of stuff. But the wounds that will heal, listen to me closely here, because this is heavy. The wounds that will heal are the wounds that will heal. Are you willing? Allow me to do this. Let Jesus help you to heal. And helping you to heal isn't just about you healing, it's about you being a healer. He helps you to heal the way he heals. Not focusing on yourself any longer, but maybe even being a part of the process to heal the one who hurt you. But that's the healing. And if you're healing, you'll be healing. If you're willing to heal, you're already healing. If you say, no, I'm not even open to that, then you've got an open wound, and it's too bad. Life is better than that. Your life is more meaningful than that. And so I hope that through prayer, and this is all a very personal thing, this is between you and God. I don't know your situation. Some of you have gone through stuff, talk about Judas kisses, talk about betrayal. Some of you have been through things I can't even imagine. And you're probably handling it way better than I could handle it. But talk to Jesus. Talk to him and let him help you to heal. It says that the slave of the high priest was the one who had his ear cut off. And just in conclusion, curious minds always want to know, who was the slave of the high priest? He was the one that lost an ear that night, at least temporarily lost an ear. And again, John tells us, John was the last of the gospel writers, and so later on he tells some things that others didn't. The guy's name was Malchus, and he tells us who the sword swinger was as well, Peter. Maybe both of them were dead by then, or maybe both of them were fully healed. Malchus, maybe he was part of the early Christian church. Maybe Peter and Malchus could sit there, around a fellowship table saying, hey, let me see if you got a scar there left for what I did, and they could laugh about it. And there's real healing because, it was Peter, it was Malchus. That was the slave of the high priest. But one more. Who was the slave of the high priest? Sounds like the first question, huh? Because that's just looking outwardly, the slave of the high priest. It was Malchus, right? No. Who was the high priest? You don't have to get your history book, you know. Jesus was the high priest. The kisses of an enemy are deceitful. There's so many charades, so many facades, so many pictures of power and wealth and things that you might envy, and there are a lot of nothing. Real power, real greatness is often very available to you, and you ignore it. You want to be the greatest in the kingdom, be the servant of all. Who was the real high priest? Jesus. Who was really in control that night? Jesus. Who's ready to heal? Jesus, always. And who was the slave of the high priest? Who was the servant? Peter. The real servant of the real high priest was Peter. Who cut off whose ear? Who was hurt the most by what was done? And when Jesus picked up that ear and put it on and healed it, I'm sure Malchus was like, thanks, that feels good. But whether Peter knew it or not, Jesus was doing more for Peter that night. Because as many things as he regretted if he'd not let Jesus do it. And I don't know how much choice Jesus gave him. Let me do it, let me do it. And somehow Peter backed off for a minute. Let him do it. Wow, did he do a lot for Peter. And for Malchus as well. It's just a picture. But one I hope you see that let him help you to heal. And if you're healing, you're healing. If you're helping, you're getting the help you need. But that's the way we heal. It's always that connection to him that connects us to others. That what is it? Our Father, feed us, forgive us, deliver us all. Man, we're a mess. But he's not ashamed to call us family. All of this Advent, all of this, he's come. How wonderful it is. He's with us. He's for you. I got to stop talking because but it's true. Let's turn to him with a couple of songs.
First bright light of promise brought out to the darkness where you found me. I remember the way that word that found me refined me through the fires of passing trials. Though heaven and earth pass away, these moments spent with you endure forever. Though memory may fail to remind me, you'll remember these moments with me. Sing of the wondrous works of the Lord. Sing of the wondrous works of the Lord. Bondage, drowning all the fears that followed hard behind me. I remember you walked me through the barren sands and called me into promised lands with you. Though heaven and earth pass away, these moments spent with you endure